Thank you, Jim. I'm Ian. I'm alcoholic from Montclair, New Jersey, and I'm grateful to be here. And, as Peter would tell me, I get to follow him, and that's the beauty. Peter's been an important part of my journey, and I'm so grateful to have him in my life and people like Jim and a lot of people on this call. And so Jim asked me to talk about the topic today about dealing with adversity in recovery. And that's what, I got quiet with it. And before we start, and just to kind of jacked up from Peter's talk, if one of my good friends in recovery would say, if everyone could just get quiet for a second, close their eyes, and let's start by stopping. And I'm going to say a set aside prayer, and I'm going to ask God to set aside everything I know for an open mind and a new experience, and to help me see the truth about the need to believe in Him, and to help me see the truth about the need to have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Amen. So I like to say the set aside prayer, just because I may say something that's not in line with your beliefs, and that's okay. And I like to clear something that I'm not a guru in this process. I just have my own experience, and if it's different from yours, that's good too. And if how I go through this and how I present is different than you've experienced, that's okay also. And I just like to, for me, and for the way I was ran my life, was if somebody said something I didn't believe or I didn't understand, I built a wall up and I couldn't hear anything else that person was saying. So I have a sobriety date, November 6, 2006, and I have a sponsor, Ron Boyum, and he has a sponsor, and I have a home group, and engaged in the recovery process. And, before I get going, I just want to go back for a second in my time. So some point in 1973, I picked up my first mood and mind altering substance, and that changed my life. It gave me a feeling kind of similar to what Peter was talking about. I felt different. I felt like bigger. I felt stronger. I felt like I could dance. And I also had a father that was very powerful in the family, except maybe in a little bit different way. And we feared my dad. And my dad was, I grew up with a mother who had me as a teenager, and a father who was a very big guy, very strong. And later on in life, I got to, and hopefully I'll get to share this, I got to experience how I used to hate my mom to how I came to love her. Because by the time I was 13, she was just shy of 30, and she didn't have the tools to deal with someone like me. She didn't have the equipment. She didn't know what it was like to live with somebody that was doing what I was doing, and to get into trouble and to hide it from my father, because she knew what would happen when my father came home and found out that I was picked up for shoplifting or something else happened, or I was suspended from school, because she knew what he would do. He would beat me. And so I grew up in this era with really no idol except one of my best friend's older brother. And sometime a few years later, he was like everything I wanted in life. He was good looking, strong, smart, athletic. And he used to protect me when I used to do stuff in school. He was a year older, and I would get into fights and he would step in. And then one day, in 1979, we were all at a party and we were coming home, and I was sitting in the back seat of the car with my friend Charlie. Don was driving, two other people in the car, and I was being that kind of kid, the annoying kid. I was flicking his ear. I was drunk. I was buzzed. I was annoying, and I was flicking his ear while he was driving. And finally, he pulled over and said, kicked me and his brother out of the car and told us to walk home. And we got out of the car, and he never came home. And that was my first experience with God. God took my idol. We found out a couple hours later that Don and the other guys were wrapped around a telephone pole. Someone went through a red light and they hit a tree, and and I carried that for a long time, that was my fault, because if I didn't flick him in the ear and he didn't stop, that guy would have been through that traffic light and he never would have hit the pole. And then and I carried this weight for a long time, and it just pushed me deeper into depression. It pushed me deeper into feeling less than, feeling fearful. And then sometime 4 or 5 years later, I met a girl, and she liked me, and it was my first real relationship. And she wanted to get married, and I was fearful to get married, but I said I would when I really meant I wouldn't. And I got into a marriage that I never should have been in. And I had an exit plan in that marriage, and I planned that I would get out. And then we had a child, and then we had a second child. And then getting out of the marriage was really more challenging at that point. And I stayed in that marriage for a long time. And all during that point, my alcoholism and other non-conference approved substances just started spiraling out of control. I introduced them to a level of light that she never knew existed. And then at some point, in the late 2005, I made my first attempt to get into recovery. It didn't work. 2006, I tried again early, and it worked for a short period of time, but I really didn't want to be there. And then in the fall of 2006, after a lot of comparing and not identifying, and a lot of I never did that, I did all that, and I put my hands on her in a drunken blackout, and that started my last trip to jail. And then I got out of jail, and I wasn't done at that point, but I was out of the house, the restraining order, and I ended up in a place that I could never imagine I was in. I'm in my early 40s. I owned a business. I wasn't welcome there. I had a house. I was homeless. I had no money. I was flat out broke. I had forged her signature on mortgages and credit lines to pay off my debts. And I found myself coming into this time, like, I'm going to give it a shot. And I did. And I went to treatment for my last time. And I came out of treatment. And I did what everyone said. And along the way, I got to meet Peter and Chris and a few other people. And I believe God put these people in my path, because I wouldn't be here today. I firmly believe, I know that no human power can relieve my alcoholism, but I believe that God put angels in my way so that they could push me through into the right direction. And so I was taught about the disease. See, for a while, I would say I'm alcoholic, but I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't realize the powerlessness. I didn't realize the grave nature of the disease. Peter brought up the first step. The first step foundation is everything to me. That I have a body that doesn't process the substance, and I have a mind that can't process reality. And on top of that, I'm completely selfish and self-centered, and I have the delusion that I can manage my own life, and I keep trying and expecting different results over and over again, and I don't get them. And I'm going to do a brief journey on my path through the steps that way, and then I'm going to come back to show you about the adversity and about how things work in this process and what this process has meant to me along the way. So I really firmly have a first step experience. To me, I believe that not that I can't pick up, that I will. And if I don't change what I'm doing and I don't continue to grow in this process, I'm going to grow closer to picking up rather than farther from it. And I came into the second step with complete hopelessness, powerlessness, unmanageability, and insanity. And I was asked a few things. I had a teacher that was awake to the process. And I'm forever grateful, and he still sponsors me today. And like the book says, he begged me to lay aside the prejudice. He begged me to put aside everything that I believed in this process. And we talked about the step. We talked about what we needed to do. And I was able to be willing to believe in a power greater than myself. I was able to see that there was something bigger than me. But I couldn't step from bridge to shore because I didn't have the experience. I didn't understand what I was committing to in this process. And I went into the third step, and I was completely clear that my life wasn't working. And I went into the fourth step, looking back at the third step to see exactly why I play God, to see exactly what my life looks like when I play God, to see the role I need you to play in my life for me to be okay, to confirm my selfish and self-centeredness. And then really what I got to be able to see for the first time at this position was that the bedevilments on page 52 were just a reflection of what my life looked like separated from power. See, I didn't understand the true depth of the lack of power. I didn't understand. See, early in the book, it tells us that the main purpose of this book is to enable us to show us exactly how to recover from alcoholism. And then it talks about the book being a promise of 100 men and women who have recovered. But by the time you get through the first step, it tells us that this book, it's a little trick. It tells me that this book is going to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. And see, at that time, I believed my problem was drinking and non-conference approved substances. What I didn't realize, my problem was lack of power. And and multiple times in this book, it says faith without works is dead. See, I could have all the belief I want, but if I'm doing nothing with it, I'm never going to grow. I'm never going to put this power to work. So I realized that I write a fourth step, not to see what a bad guy I am, I know the stuff I did, but I write this inventory in this fourth step and the common manifestations, my resentments, my fears, and my conduct and motives in relationships to see what my life looks like disconnected from power. And I get to go to a fifth step and I get to admit it to myself. See, I had the delusion God knew what I did and I knew what I did. But this time I had to truly admit to myself the exact natures, the deep root of what was underneath it, the fears that drove my existence. See, I was riddled with depression and anxiety. I self-medicated until I crossed a line. I needed stuff to function normally. See, I was a different kind of drinker and a different kind of user. I used to try and feel normal. And then at certain points, I used to try and get high or obliviated. And then what ended up happening was I got to see the exact nature of my wrongs. I got to see the fears and the disconnection underneath it. And I got to admit it to somebody else. And I got free of some of the stuff that I thought I would take to my grave. And I came to the sixth step and we talked about it. And I just needed to be willing to change. I saw what my life looked like and I needed to be willing to change. And the beauty of the seventh step, and the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to circle back to this. But the seventh step for me was such a beautiful process, because all I needed to do, this was the deep dive off the high dive. I needed to jump with a blindfold. It's where I was able to step from bridge to shore, where my cornerstone was put in place. This is where God became everything to me. See, it's a simple prayer, and it just tells me that all I need to do is give everything to God, the good and the bad. I don't have to judge anything, and God will take care of the rest. I don't need to name my character defects. I don't need to work on them. I don't need to do anything. I just need to come to a place that I'm ready and willing to change. And I ask God to do the changing right then and there by taking away anything in my being that stands in my way of being useful to Him. And then I was able to sit down and make a list of the people I harmed. I had most of it already. There were some harms that weren't due to resentments. And then I went out and started knocking on doors. And I come from a lineage. Some people on this call come from the same lineage. I don't take my sponsees and kick them out and tell them to just go start making amends. I pray on them. I pray on them, and I pray on them. I pray for the willingness to keep making them. And when I'm ready to make those amends, God presents those people to me. And one of the amends that I was able to make in this process was a couple years back, about 5.5 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and I knew she wasn't going to make it. And, here was the woman that I tormented, that I hated, that, I despised. I felt like I was a mistake. She was a kid and she had me, and then, realized she was pregnant and needed to get married. So my whole life, I felt like I was the mistake, and so we got to sort things out, and I got to make an amends through this process, and a beautiful amends. And I got to spend time with, prior to that. And then by the time she was ready to be put into a place that we knew it was over, I got to sit with her at the end. And the doctor came in and said that, they had her pumped up on morphine. She was not really there, in a coma at this point. And the doctor came in and said that she won't go because she could tell that people are in the room. And I asked everyone to leave, and I got in bed with her at the hospital, and I was able to hold her hand, and I told her everything I said that I would do when I made amends to her, and to take care of the things I was able to. And I held her hand and said that, Mom, I got one hand and God has the other, and He's ready to take you home. And it's time to go. And she passed. And it was a beautiful experience for me, and it was peaceful, and I was free. I was free of everything I felt through this process. And I got to make a lot of other amends. I got to make amazing amends to the woman I was married to, where our marriage didn't last when we got into recovery. And I got to make amends to my children. And I got to start living, as the 10 steps said, in the world of the spirit. I was a different person. In the spiritual appendix, it talks about that the newcomer doesn't realize, or realizes, people realize that he doesn't realize the change in other people seeing him. And I started feeling the change. I knew what things were different. My life started coming back together again. I was starting to work again. I was starting to get back stuff in my life. And I was starting to do something that I witnessed a lot of times in this process with people I had sponsored. I traded the insanity for the first drink for the insanity that I can run my life again. See, God had my alcoholism, but certain stuff in my life, maybe he was too busy for. Or maybe I just thought I could do a better job. And things started to get a little cocky in my life. And on May 22nd, 2016, I got a call from my ex-wife in panic. And she said, I saw the message, said, I listened to it to pick up the phone. And I thought our dog had, in my head, I thought our dog had run across the street or something and got hit by a car. And I was prepared to call her back to find out that the dog had died when she told me our son died. And, I didn't want to hear what she said. And I asked her again what did she just say? And she said that Alex died. And he was 23 years old and he died in a tragic accident. And I felt like my chest had just been compressed. I felt like a ton of bricks or a car just was on top of me and I couldn't breathe. And I didn't know what to do. So I did what I was taught through this process. I got quiet for a second and I got on my knees and I prayed. And then I cried and I drove to her house and I called my sponsor. And by the time I got to her house, maybe 20, 25 of you were there waiting for me, holding me up. My sponsees became my sponsor. And, when Jim asked me to talk about how to deal with adversity or tragedy, through this process, I really don't go to the podium often. I don't like to do it anymore. Jim said to me that he had a spot for me listed already. So I got quiet and said I couldn't not do it. So I said I would do it. And we chose the time and the time worked. And, how do I use this process to deal with adversity, to deal with tragedy? Well, the first part of it is in the vision for you, it says that I can't transmit something I haven't gotten. So it's clear that in order to go through any tragedy, any loss, any big uncomfortable situation, I need to get to the Holy Grail. I need to have a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. I need to, and what happened after that is I realized that everything in my life, I had a whole different experience. I realized that everything in my life belonged to God. I realized that my house, my car, my job, my money, my children, Alex, they're all God's. He gives me a house. He gives me a job. He gives me a relationship. He gave me children to parent. And it was time for Alex to go home. And it took me a little while to get through that and to grasp that. It took me about a year and a half to forgive God. And I was able to because I was awake to the process. I was able to because I was able to hear. Someone in my office who I'm very close with came up to me and said, Ian, you better get busy living or you're going to get busy dying. And I knew that this isn't what I was brought here to do, was to suffer like this. So I seeked and I prayed. And see, we go through this 12-step process to change, to clear away a channel so that we can get the power in. See, lack of power is our dilemma. And if I don't have a channel to let the power flow, I'm not going to have power. And so I needed to clear away some more power. I needed to open the doors I needed to open the channels, and I went back and I rewrote some inventory, and I prayed on it, and I wrote inventory on God, and I seeked, and I went up, and I spend my summers in northern Scotland, but because of this pandemic, I can't be there. And there's a reverend up there, Susan Brown, who told me, Ian, have you had the fight with God yet? And I said, I don't want to fight with God. And she said, if you're in any relationship with anybody, you need to fight. Because if you hold it back, you'll hold the resentments against God, and you'll pick up again. And she knows I'm in recovery. She knows the situation. And she knew that if I held back and didn't change, it was going to go back. And so I prayed on it. And then one day I got to have this fight under an archway in a beautiful place, way out in the middle of northern Scotland. And I screamed out to God, how could you do this to me? And what I heard back was that I was so selfish and self-centered that he had a mother and friends and a sister and grandparents and co-workers and teammates and all kinds of other people in his life. And how could I think that this was done to me? And what I heard was he was my child and I wanted him home. And right then and there, I was able to get free from the resentment I was brewing against God. I was able to open up the door. I was able to see the light in the tunnel. And what happened at that point was I was truly able to step from bridge to shore. See, if I don't have this process, if I'm not awake and I'm not taking people through this, it says early in the book that nothing will ensure permanent recovery except strenuous work, one alcoholic with another. And if I'm not awake to it and I'm not doing it, I won't be able to withstand these times in my life. See, what my ex-wife at the time, she wasn't worried that I was going to pick up, but she was worried that I was going to kill myself because I had already had 3 failed suicide attempts before I came into this process. And I stayed close to God through this process, and I continue to. And I realized as I got through, and a year went by, and 2 years went by, and 3 years, and we just passed the 4th year anniversary of my son's death. And, I get to forgive everything today. I get to live in a life of peace and surrender. I'm not living in fear. I get to do a lot of the things that I wouldn't have done maybe. I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't know what's good or bad. I know what Peter had said early on, my truth's my truth until it isn't. And through this process, what I get is to get restored to sanity where I wouldn't pick up even if I could. And I get to enjoy this process and sponsor people. And so through this pandemic, what has been amazing about it is that all through prior to my son's passing, I always sponsored a lot of young kids in the area. And they all had moved on, went back to college, went back to high school, graduated, and we get back together and we reformed a new home group. And, one of the things that had always kind of weighed me down was that as I was getting through this process and prior to my son's death, and my son and daughter who would always come to my home group and give me my coin each year, and they tell, they didn't understand what we do. My daughter never saw me drunk. My son did. He witnessed me put my hands on his mother. They gave me a coin and were able to tell the home group people, we don't know what you do, but we thank you for giving us a father. And year after year of that. But the one thing my son didn't understand was why we do what we do. and why I have to care about other people, and why I have to put your needs in front of mine, and why I don't fight with people anymore, and why I wouldn't tell him that if somebody thinks they're right, it's okay for them to be right. I don't have to prove them wrong. And he would constantly say to me, why do you have to do this stuff? Why can't you not do that? And it used to bother me, like that was the one thing that I just never got to really explain to him. And then one day I get a card in the mail, and I'll read it because it's how I'm gonna close this talk. And it says that heaven has one too many angels today. And I want to share a quick story of your son's kindness to a stranger. I was not a member of the banking class where he went to as an intern. So when I arrived to training, I was alone. In fact, I was terrified. When I sat down for the first time, your son was watching something on his laptop, and I made a quick comment about it, and he laughed, and he introduced himself, and he proceeded to invite me to sit next to him. And he took it upon himself to introduce me to the other members of the class with the words, "Hey, come meet my new friend Connor." He told me that his father used to tell him that it's more important to help somebody new than to help someone old. And those few words define my friendship with Alex, a friendship marked by an unbelievable act of kindness that blesses me today. No parent should suffer your pain, but I want to assure you the best of your son continues to live on. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was good and kind and smart and funny, and he was my friend. And I know God wanted him home, but I must say heaven has one too many angels. So when I got that card, I had closure. I had peace, and I thank God. And I want to thank this group and Jim for asking me to share. And I want to, most importantly, I want to thank God for giving me the gift of desperation to have come to this process, to have been beaten to a point that I wanted to die so that I can live, and for giving me a marriage that I never wanted to be in so that I can have two children that I got to be their father, and for the gifts that I was able to spend with my son while he was alive, and I get to be a father to my daughter today. And I get to sponsor people, and I get to give this stuff away. And most importantly, I get to have a relationship with power today. And it's not just the belief and trust, it's about the relationship with my problem solver. And without that, I couldn't sit here today and share with you. And without having had this experience, I couldn't transmit what I had never received. So with that, I want to thank Jim in this meeting for allowing me to share. God bless you and thank you.